2014, a warehouse worker named Daniel moved into a quiet, aging apartment building on the outskirts of Chicago. Attracted by the low rent and the promise that the neighboring unit had been empty for years. Something the landlord mentioned casually before quickly changing the subject. And for the first 2 weeks, Daniel enjoyed the unnatural silence of the place, sleeping during the day and working nights without hearing so much as a footstep in the halls. Until one night at exactly 2:17 a.m. his phone rang from an unknown number. And when he answered, he heard nothing but slow, heavy breathing, close and intimate, followed by a whisper asking why he was awake before the line abruptly went dead. A call he dismissed as a prank, until the same thing happened. The next night, at the exact same time, the breathing returning, this time accompanied by a faint echoing sound like footsteps in a hallway, and a voice warning him that he shouldn't walk around at night. After which Daniel contacted his phone provider only to be told the number didn't exist in their system. Something that shouldn't have been possible. And yet, the calls continued every single night at 2:17 a.m., growing more specific and terrifying as the voice began describing Daniel's actions in real time, commenting when he turned on the television, when he sat down, when he stood up, until one night the voice whispered, "I can hear your television," causing Daniel to panic and rush into the hallway where he found it empty, except for the flickering light above the door of Unit 304, the supposedly abandoned apartment. And soon Daniel stopped answering the calls altogether. But that didn't stop them from coming. The phone vibrating relentlessly at 2:17 a.m. each night, until one evening the ringing didn't come at all, and instead Daniel heard 3 slow, deliberate knocks coming. Not from his door, but from the wall he shared with Unit 304, a wall that should have bordered an empty room. And when he pressed his ear against it, he could hear breathing on the other side, matching his own, synchronized as if whatever was there was listening to him listen, after which the knocking turned into scratching, long dragging sounds that traced along the wall at shoulder height, night after night, until Daniel complained to the landlord, who reluctantly admitted that the previous tenant of Unit 304 had died inside after obsessively calling his neighbors late at night to complain about noise that no one else could hear. A man whose phone had been found crushed in his hand when the police arrived, and who had reportedly continued to call neighbors for weeks after his death, according to building rumors. Something Daniel tried to dismiss until one final night, when the phone rang again at 20:17 a.m., and this time he answered, despite his terror, only to hear his own voice speaking back to him from the other end, describing his apartment in perfect detail, telling him he was standing by the wall, telling him he was afraid, telling him that Unit 304 was never empty, and as the voice whispered that it was tired of the wall and wanted to come home, the knocking erupted violently, and the wall began to crack, prompting Daniel to flee the apartment that same night, leaving everything behind. And although he later learned the building was demolished after structural complaints, Daniel still claims that his phone sometimes rings at exactly 2:17 a.m. from an unknown number. And when he doesn't answer, a voicemail appears containing nothing but breathing, slow and patient, as if something on the other side is still waiting for him to come back. In 2015, a man named Mark, a security guard working the night shift at an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of Detroit, took the job because it paid well and he liked the quiet. But he quickly realized that the hospital was not as empty as it seemed. For on the first night, walking through the hallways lined with peeling paint and broken equipment, he heard faint footsteps echoing behind him, slow and deliberate. And when he turned, no one was there. Only long, dark corridors stretching into the shadows. And over the next few nights, the sounds became more distinct. Whispers in the stairwells, doors creaking open on their own, the metallic clang of something heavy being dragged across the floor above him. And Mark tried to rationalize it, telling himself the old building was settling, that rats or stray animals were responsible, but the unease grew into a gnawing fear that he couldn't shake. And then the reports began. Cameras he set up to monitor the empty wings showed fleeting figures, pale and thin, moving just outside the frame, appearing in one hallway and vanishing in the next. And once on playback, one figure turned toward the camera, revealing a face so distorted and hollow-eyed that Mark felt his stomach twist and his hands sweat. Yet when he returned to the hospital to investigate, there was nothing. No footprints, no evidence of anyone having been there. And then one night, while making his rounds at 2:46 a.m., he heard a sound he couldn't ignore. A faint crying coming from the pediatric wing, which had been abandoned for decades. And as he followed the sound, he saw a small figure at the end of the hallway, hunched over, rocking back and forth, humming a lullaby so faint that he almost thought he imagined it. And when he stepped closer, the figure turned, revealing a face that was half child, half grotesque mask of decay, eyes black and wet, staring at him without blinking. And the moment he opened his mouth to speak, the figure darted down the hall faster than humanly possible, disappearing through walls that should have been solid, leaving Mark frozen in terror. And from that night on, the hospital seemed alive in ways he couldn't explain. Lights flickering in patterns that spelled nothing but felt deliberate. Doors that slammed behind him even when he hadn't touched them. The sound of a wheelchair rolling across the empty floor when none was there. And sometimes the whispering, voices repeating his name, laughing softly, crying softly, speaking in languages he couldn't recognize, yet somehow intimately familiar, like fragments of memories that weren't his own. And one night he discovered a room he had never seen before. Its door previously solid and now slightly ajar, and inside were rows of hospital beds covered in sheets, despite the fact that the building had been abandoned for decades. And in each bed, a doll lay, old and worn, their eyes open, staring directly at him. Some with faint traces of black liquid along their seams, almost like tears. And as Mark stepped closer, he felt movement, a pulse under the sheets. And the doll's head slowly turned, and then the lights went out, plunging him into darkness. And when they flickered back, one doll was sitting upright on the floor, inches from his feet, grinning in a way no inanimate object should. And he felt it, cold, deliberate breath against his ankle, though no human was there. And the cameras, when he reviewed the footage the next day, showed everything static, nothing moving except one bed where the eel lifted its head toward the ceiling slowly, deliberately, and stared at the ceiling for hours as if listening, waiting. And then the doll blinked, its glassy eyes turning fully black, and Mark couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think of anything but the hospital and its inhabitants. And eventually, repeating words he had never spoken aloud but thought silently. phrases describing his day, his movements, his fears. And one night, as he tried to block it all out, his phone rang, displaying a number he didn't recognize. And when he answered, a soft, childlike voice whispered, "We see you, Mark," followed by silence. And the next day, when he returned to the hospital, he found the front doors unlocked, the security system offline, and the corridor lined with more dolls than he remembered. Their heads tilted toward him, some perched on windowsills, some hanging from hooks, all staring, all waiting. And as he walked the hall, he heard faint footsteps behind him again, but now they matched his own pace. Exactly. Stopping when he stopped, turning when he turned, and the whispers began again. This time, saying things like, "You can't leave. We want you. You belong here." And the air grew colder with each word, frosting his breath in the dim light, and the doll's black eyes seemed to reflect not just him, but something else behind him. Shapes moving, crawling just beyond sight. And when he turned, the hallway stretched impossibly long, the exit receding, the walls bending like liquid, and Mark ran, tripping over the uneven floors, the whispering following him. And as he reached the lobby, the main entrance slammed shut on its own, the glass cracking slightly, and from the ceiling, a faint scraping began, like hundreds of fingernails on metal, echoing through the empty building, and the dolls scattered throughout the hallways began to move toward him, slowly, methodically, some crawling on all fours, some lifting from the beds. And Mark ran upstairs to the security office, locking himself inside. But the cameras were no longer showing the rooms as they were. Instead, the monitors displayed corridors filled with figures, children, dolls, shadows, all moving in unison toward the office, and one monitor showed him sitting in the chair asleep, while something crawled into the seat behind him, breathing down his neck. And as he looked up at the door, he could swear it was bending inward slightly, like it was being pulled from another dimension. And then he felt a touch on his shoulder, cold and insistent, and the whispering returned, louder than ever, repeating his name, calling him to join them, promising he would be safe if he stayed. And in desperation, he smashed the cameras and the monitors, hearing glass shatter, wires snap, and the movement ceased for a brief moment. And he thought he could escape. But the building had changed, hallways looping endlessly, stairs leading nowhere, doors opening to walls, and through it all he could hear the faint sound of dolls laughing softly, crying softly, whispering softly. And eventually, Mark was never seen again. Though the hospital remained standing, abandoned security cameras occasionally catching flashes of movement where no human could fit, and those who venture too close at night report hearing footsteps, whispers, and sometimes faint Occasionally, if a passerby looks through a cracked window, they see a man walking the hallways endlessly, alone yet surrounded by the dolls, their black eyes following him, their whispering voices repeating his name, claiming him, reminding everyone that some places never let go of the living, that some buildings remember the footsteps of those who enter. And the abandoned hospital in Detroit, its walls lined with peeling paint and broken tiles, remains one of the most haunted locations in the city, with stories of Mark and the dolls passed quietly among urban explorers and police officers alike. A warning that curiosity and courage sometimes lead to nightmares that never end, and that when the lights flicker in an empty building, The shadows may not belong to the living at all. In 2017, a young woman named Lisa moved into a small historic townhouse in Boston, drawn by the low rent and the charming old architecture, with creaking floors and narrow stairways that felt like something out of a period film. But soon she realized the house carried a history no realtor mentioned, for the previous tenants had left abrupt. Lee and neighbors whispered about strange noises at night and shadows moving through the windows. And at first, Lisa thought it was just her imagination as she settled in. The occasional creak and groan of the old building, until one evening around midnight she awoke to a faint whispering coming from the living room. Indistinct at first, like the hum of a radio, except there was no radio on, and when she walked to investigate, the whispering stopped, leaving the room completely empty. Though a chill lingered in the air, and the feeling of being watched pressed against her skin. And the next night the same thing happened, only this time the whispering seemed to call her name. Lisa. Dragging voice that made her heart race and her hands tremble. And when she asked aloud who was there, the voice didn't answer, but she swore she felt someone brush past her in the narrow hallway, a cold, weightless touch that left her shaking, prompting her to install a small camera in the living room, thinking she would catch a prank or a burglar. But reviewing the footage the next day only deepened the terror, because it showed nothing unusual except a shadow that darted across the corner of the room, too fast to be human, and then froze in the corner staring at the camera as if it knew it was being watched, and the shadow seemed to grow slightly each night, creeping closer toward the center of the room, moving even when she was awake and watching. And then the phone call started. Always at 30, the number unknown. And when Lisa answered, she heard a low, distorted voice that mimicked her own, repeating fragments of conversations she had had that day, even repeating the questions she had whispered to herself in the middle of the night. And one night, the voice said, "I see you in the mirror." And Lisa, terrified, ran to the bathroom and saw nothing at first. Only her reflection in the cracked old mirror above the sink, until the reflection moved slightly differently than she did, tilting its head as if observing her silently, its eyes darker than hers, its smile faint and wrong. And when she screamed, the voice on the phone laughed, head in perfect harmony with her, and then hung up, leaving her trembling and alone. And over the next week, the phenomena escalated. Doors that she locked in the morning would be unlocked when she returned. Lights flickering in patterns she couldn't explain, objects in her apartment moving by themselves, sometimes appearing closer to the front door, sometimes piled in corners. And worst of all were the mirrors, which now reflected figures that weren't there, always standing behind her in the reflection, even when the room behind her was empty. And once she recorded one, she saw in the footage a dark figure slowly reaching out of the glass, hand emerging as if trying to pull her in, lips moving but silent. And when she showed the footage to a friend, the video distorted, static covering the figure completely, as a whispering voice filled the audio repeating, "You can't leave, Lisa. You can't leave." And in the days after that, she began to notice scratches on her arms when she woke, faint and raw, as if someone or something had tried to grip her in her sleep. And her pets would cower in corners, growling at nothing, their hair standing on end, while shadows darted across walls when no light was present. And the phone calls continued nightly at 3:03 a.m., each one repeating her own voice, her own words, sometimes sentences she hadn't spoken aloud yet, sometimes cries she hadn't yet felt. And the most terrifying moment came one morning when Lisa awoke to find herself standing in the bathroom, staring at the mirror, with her phone resting on the counter beside her. Screen lit, displaying a video of herself asleep, her own terrified face staring back at her. Except in the video, her eyes were black, her mouth moving unnaturally as it whispered, "You're mine." And when she tried to look away, the reflection in the mirror repeated the words with a grin that she hadn't made, moving independently of her, as if her body and her reflection were separate entities, one trapped, one free. And as the days went on, she tried to escape the townhouse, but each time she stepped outside, a sudden force of vertigo or nausea or unseen pressure would push her back inside, as if the house itself was alive, keeping her trapped. And she even tried calling friends, going to cafes, staying overnight in motels, but the house would always appear when she returned. The windows black at night, the door unlocked, and at precisely 3:03 a.m., the phone would ring with the unknown number, and the distorted version of her own voice would whisper things she hadn't yet done or hadn't yet thought. And sometimes, when she dared sleep, she felt cold hands pressing on her chest, pushing her down into the bed as if something was while the mirrors reflected figures crawling toward her from the walls and ceiling, moving closer, inch by inch every second, until she could no longer distinguish reality from reflection, until one night she finally recorded everything. Stacked cameras in every room. And when she played back the footage the next day, all screens showed her sleeping peacefully in her bed. Nothing unusual, except in each reflection, smiling faintly. And in one corner, the faint outline of herself stood perfectly still. Black, eyed, watching, whispering. And although Lisa finally moved out the next week, leaving all her possessions behind and refusing to ever speak of the townhouse again, she still receives occasional calls at exactly 3, an unknown number with a distorted voice that repeats her own words and sometimes whispers, I remember you." And she swears she can see movement in mirrors, even in her new apartment. Shadows that mimic her movements for a fraction of a second longer than she does. And she never sleeps without checking the mirrors first, covering the reflective surfaces, leaving them black, because she knows that whatever was in that townhouse came with her, tethered to her in a way she can't explain. A presence that doesn't forget, that doesn't forgive, and that watches and waits, always at 3:03 a.m., ready to speak in her own voice, to call her back to the house, to pull her into the mirrors, where she will become just another reflection, just another whisper, just another shadow trapped behind the glass.